everyone. I am Stacy Shellman-Kendrick, the Director of Education at the Crocker Art Museum, and welcome to Gallery Bytes. We're so excited to be here. I, for one, usually, because I am head of education, I'm like the principal at a school, so I end up standing in my office all day, pushing papers around. I never get to play with kids, and so I'm super, super excited to be here at Gallery Bytes today, and we are thrilled to be talking about a wonderful work of art. But before we talk about the artwork, we're going to just let you know that it has some violence in it, and so if you're not in the mood for that today, or if you're sensitive, please feel free to join us another time. We'd love to have you come back and talk to us about art soon. Today, we are celebrating Pride Month. And Pride is a commemoration of the moment that the gay liberation movement got kicked off in 1969. For Pride Month, we have a special guest with us today. We have Miss Alamode. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's a thrill for us as well. Now, I want to tell a little bit about your bio, and then I'm going to ask a little bit about you. So,
Great.
You are the 2019 Sacramento News and Review Performer of the Year.
Yes.
You've been performing since 2015.
Yes.
And you're an educator as well.
Yes.
You work in your alter ego life at 916 Inc. And I wanted to congratulate you because you're the 2021 I want to say the correct title name. You say it.
Miss Gay Sacramento.
So congratulations on that. Tell us a little bit about how Alamode was born.
Yeah, so I went to college for dance. I have a degree in dance, and when I graduated college, I met with some friends who were doing a lot of performances in nightlife at clubs, and so I started making dances and creating along with them, and I moved to Sacramento in 2018, and Alamode kind of started to just flourish and grow, and now this is kind of my final form. It's sort of like a Pokemon evolution. This is my final form. Yeah.
And you performed in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia,
Yes.
New York, all over. Well, we are truly happy to have you here to investigate this work of art with us.
Yes, I'm excited.
I am excited too because the museum has been closed and I haven't gotten to look at art a lot. And so this is a great opportunity, particularly because it is Pride Month, to focus on this piece, which is called Stonewall, but I'm not going to give too much of it away right now. So what I always tell people to do when we're looking at a work of art is to really look at it closely. You want to put this work of art on like it's a piece of clothing, yeah, or drink it up like it's water and you're in the desert, and really soak it in. So can I encourage you to get up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. We're gonna have our eyes go up and down, left to right, right to left. You can zigzag it, but really explore this work of art with your eyes as much as you can on the screen. Sometimes I like to pull out a little bit when I'm looking at a work of art. And sometimes your eye catches a detail and then you sort of go back in. So there's a lot to see here, huh?
There's a lot.
I know you guys also probably have a lot of questions, but we're going to go and we'll talk about this piece. And Mallory Marsh, who is the Associate Director of Education at the Crocker, she's going to be your voice. Say hi, Mallory.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. I'll be watching in the chat, so if you have any questions or answers for our presenters, go ahead and drop that in the chat, and I will relay it for you.
Thank you. So first, Ms. Mo, tell me what do you see? What's going on in this work of art?
Well, I see a lot of conflict. That's the first thing that I see. I see some fighting going on.
Okay.
I also see a lot of color, which I'm really loving.
Let's talk about the conflict. So what in the piece makes you say that you see conflict?
Well, I see a bunch of people on the floor kind of cowering away in fear. And then I see a large group up top. It looks to be police officers who are kind of attacking the people who are in the bottom half of the painting.
I like that. Maybe Houghton, who's with us, can drill down on this sort of, we'll talk about the piece going clockwise.
Great.
And so this part up here, you mentioned. Now what's going on there?
So I see a whole group, a cluster of police officers in a very uniform, like balanced pattern. They're all in formation.
Yes.
I see a flag, and then I see a bunch of bottles that have been thrown.
Now, do we normally throw bottles around?
No, not generally.
No, not in my house either, Miss Mode. No. So that might tell us that there's some chaos happening, right?
Yes.
Yeah, some things out of control there. Okay, and I like the interesting thing that you said is that you have the police officers, which you recognize from the helmets and the horses, as well as the batons, sort of in a uniform manner. But then, as I noted, there's a little bit of chaoticness going on. Let's move our eyes a little bit further down. What's happening in that lower right quadrant, let's call it?
So I see people kind of, again, like I said, cowering in fear, very scared. And there's this gentleman right in the corner who's sort of shielding himself, looking very afraid. But what I also really like is there's a lot of color, the bright green, the bright red that's going on, and even the bright blue eyeshadow of this woman right here.
Oh, I do love blue eyeshadow. So I agree. The faces of the figures in that section definitely look scared to me. They look frightened, and as you said, you know, they're trying to be also in a defensive mode, trying to protect themselves in some instances. And as we move to this, because we're still going clockwise, what do we see on the faces of the people in this section?
It's a little mixed. There's someone who looks like they might have been attacked and they might not be fully there, let's put it that way. And then we have someone who's kind of in the midst of falling back when they were trying to maybe defend themselves. And as we move along, it sort of morphs into people who are fighting back. We can see this man right here. He's kind of comforting the horse, but he also has that fist down below, kind of ready to defend himself.
Yeah, so there's a contrast, a difference between the people over here and the people over here, in the sense that these people seem a little bit more frightened, these people seem a little bit more angry or a little bit upset. As our eyes sort of move up, we might have the reason why they might be a little upset. What's going on with the police officers depicted here?
I see a lot of police officers, almost too many to count, and it seems like the people in the bottom half might be outnumbered. There might be more police officers than there are people who are fighting back.
They definitely are over them, so that might note a sense of power, whereas they are more vulnerable. They're not on horses, they are on horses. And then all the batons that I can see have a little bit of motion. And that's interesting too, because when we think about horses and we think of, we think a little bit about motion, but there's definitely action happening in that section. Anything else you see that you might want to note?
I love all the lines. So specifically we have stripes in their clothes, some stripes here, here, on this man's pants, and then on that man's shirt. And then the lines coming out from the batons and the flagpoles.
I love that you noticed that, because often as an art educator, a museum educator, we talk about the elements of art. And the elements of art are like color, lines, shape, pattern. And you are brilliant because you mentioned a lot of those when you was talking about what you saw. So let's talk about some patterns. So you talked about sort of seeing some patterns. When you talked about the sort of uniformity of the police, that's a pattern. It's a shape, or at least in this picture, it's a figure that repeats over and over again. And then you talked about just patterns that the artists use in the clothing. So here and here, there's a lot of different patterns used in the clothing of the figures depicted. But then you mentioned lines, and there's lines, these big batons are essentially just lines. They're just drawn as lines going in different motions and different compositions, which gives us a sense of movement. So yeah, you have a great eye. Now, I'm wondering about if you feel a sense of balance. That's another thing that we talk about in art, sort of composition, balance. Balance is like, it can be symmetrical or asymmetrical. Does it feel like you got some high heels on? So balance is something I'm sure you think about.
Yes, all the time, all the time.
So tell me, does this feel balanced or does it not feel balanced? What do you think?
It doesn't feel balanced. So normally if it's symmetrical, it's the same thing on both sides. Like this is a symmetrical image, right? My hands look like the same on either side if I were to draw a straight line in the center. But if it was asymmetrical, it might be something like this, where it's not the same image when I draw a line in the center. I see a lot of asymmetry here. This is very asymmetrical. It's not balanced.
No, it's not. But you know, I'll tell you a clue. Sometimes artists in history, they would use like a sort of a compositional frame. And this artist uses a compositional frame around a triangle. Can you see that triangle?
Yes.
I wonder if the boys and girls at home can see it. Guys, do you see the triangle composition? Where do you see the sort of maybe top of the triangle?
So I'm starting it off at the police officer right up top.
Yes.
And kind of blending into the horse.
Yes.
There's the lady in the polka dot shirt. And then there's the gentleman right here in the green pants. They sort of form this triangle.
Yeah, I wonder if everybody at home can see that. And I think it's interesting too because I think the artist also accentuates that triangle by giving that pop of color. So you talked about it before, this sort of red and orange, and then the purple, and then going this way, the man in the pink shirt, and then the orange shirt and the red pants. They all are sort of a bright spot on a painting that has mostly what color in it?
A lot of blue.
Yeah, a lot of blue. And blue is a funny color because most of the time when artists use blue, they're trying to create a sense of calm and cool. But is this a calm and cool scene? No, it is not. There's a lot of action happening in this. So I think that's an interesting contrast that the artist used cool colors, but to give it a sense of pop, he put up some sort of bright colors to create a sense of wow to it. Now, let's talk about emphasis. Where would you say that emphasis is happening based on the triangular composition, the colors, the patterns you talked about? Is there some place the artist really expects our eye to go?
I think we see it first in the center, and then kind of our eyes kind of zoom out a little bit. It's almost like when you're zooming in to take a photo, and then you zoom out to the whole scene. So the first thing I notice is this bright white horse, and then I'm kind of zooming out. I start with that triangle, and then it almost kind of swirls out to the outer layers, sort of like when you're peeling an onion away.
Yeah. Now, I love this piece because there is so much to see. The people in it, they feel a little bit cartoonish to some people. Would you agree to that?
I agree, yeah. There's a lot of really stark, cartoonish expressions, almost caricatures. Particularly, I'm looking at these two police officers right here. Their face almost look like masks, and not as if that's their actual skin. It's kind of frightening.
It's a little frightening. Interesting thing too, when you said frightening, I was looking at this horse. This horse looks a little scared. Like,
yes.
What are you got me into? I was at a carrot this morning. Now I'm in this mess. But yeah, I think that's true. Now I'm thinking, if I was the artist, I have options, right? I can make things very realistic. I can make things stick figures. Why do you think the artist might have used this sort of playful cartoonish to do something that seems a little serious?
I think it draws us in. We want to look at it, and also it helps us sort of understand a little bit more which community we're talking about. This is a community that has been through so much, and it's such a colorful community. We love to celebrate, and we love to be in community with each other, and I love the use of color in this piece of work because it reminds me of the joy despite all the pain.
So let's talk a little bit more about the painting then, what's behind the painting, for those of you who may not know. So this painting is a piece by Standout Burke, and it's part of a series all based on Stonewall. And he did it in 1998 to commemorate in 1999 the 30th anniversary of the Stonewall, I'll call it rebellion, but the gay liberation movement, which was, they feel, initiated by Stonewall. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what that history means. First of all, what is Stonewall?
Yeah, so Stonewall is a bar for the LGBTQIA community in the heart of the Village in New York City. And it was a place where people, before they were allowed to, legally, by law, congregate, they would go and they would meet, and they would see their friends and spend time together.
So the painting is focused on that one particular bar, and I think Houghton has an image of it too. Thanks, Houghton. So we can sort of see it's just a little place. It's like, you know, it has a huge meaning now, but it was just like a hole in the wall, as my mom would call it, place. And the movement started largely because, I guess, back in the 60s, there was a practice for policemen to go to bars and essentially try to stop the gatherings, right?
Yes. Yeah, it would be sort of like if someone came to your birthday party and told you that you couldn't celebrate yourself with your friends just as you are. A little bit more intense, a little bit more violent. But basically, police officers would come into these spaces and tell people they couldn't dance with each other, maybe because it was two men or two women. And it was really hard to be yourself at that time.
So here we are in June 1969. The police come one more night, they come to try to stop this type of gathering, and people are like, not today.
Not today.
Not tonight, just done.
What does your friend say again?
Oh, my friend, I have a friend who's from Jamaica, and when she's done, she says, me done, man, me done. And so they were like, me done. And so they were like, no, and they started fighting back. And so tell me a little bit about like what that meant as far as what it kicked off.
Exactly. So finally, our community, the LGBTQIA community, decided that they were done being treated that way. They didn't want people coming into their spaces telling them they couldn't be who they were. They couldn't be themselves. And this was a really important moment in our community's history.
And so I find it interesting because like recently, this past, I guess about a year ago now, we had several riots in a lot of major cities kicked off because of George Floyd. Stonewall Burke was himself really consumed by not only this riot, but the riots related to Rodney King in LA. And he really wanted to depict some of the social justices that have led to moments like this that have created change. And so the thing that I didn't know that I found out recently, that this kicked off 5 days of riots.
Yes.
I had no idea.
5 days of riots, and two of the people who we always talk about who are kind of the leaders of this uprising, Marsha P. Johnson, who was a trans black activist, and Sylvia Rivera, who was a trans Latinx activist. These are two women, some of the most marginalized in our community, who really fought for us.
That's amazing. I love that it was always women leading the charge.
Always.
So great. So 5 days of riots, and then essentially a year later, they, I think, had the first parade in commemoration of this moment. And ever since, for the last, gosh, over 50 years now, we've been commemorating Stonewall in June as Pride Month because it was such a turning point in the gay liberation movement.
Yeah, and I think what's so important too is that first march the year after this happened was a march almost as a protest, but a very peaceful protest. And it's now morphed into a march and also a pride parade. But it's really important to understand the distinction between the two things. In the same way we had these protests the past year in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, they're very different events. A parade is where you might celebrate, and you're not as focused maybe on fighting for your rights. The march is really where it all began for us.
Yeah. And I think, as you said, it's not only like parades now, there's lectures, there's symposiums, there's concerts, all leading back to this moment of change. One of the things I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about too was that Stonewall Burke didn't just do this piece, he did about 20 pieces connected to Stonewall. And so some of the pieces have like sort of different points of view, and I think Houghton's going to show us some of those now. But I think it's really interesting how he takes a subject and he sort of looks at it from a lot of different vantage points. This particular piece, I think, is one of the more, what people have said, one of the more essential pieces of that series. And I know the Crocker is extremely happy to have it because it allows us to have these types of conversations. One of the things I think is really interesting that Stonewall Burke did is when he did these pieces, because he considered himself sort of a contemporary historian painter, he followed a genre called history painting. And history painting started sort of with biblical scenes and mythological scenes, but in the 7th and 18th centuries, they were really focused a lot on big historical events. And so this painting is essentially a mimic of a piece done by, and I'll probably not remember the artist's name correct, but it's Charles Philippe Laviere, I believe it's pronounced. And the painting is Bâtille de Mont something, I'm not sure, but it is a piece, and we were joking because I took 4 years of French and I'm still butchering the language, 3 years of Spanish, and I call myself speaking Frenchish because I blend everything together. But this piece is essentially inspired by that, and I know Houghton will show you that piece, and you can sort of see the similarities. The sort of composition is the same, and even down to a figure on a horse, the army soldiers, people being trampled by horses, and we have like a nice little comparison that we wanted to put up for you to give a sense of the way that Stonewall Burke really is inspired. Now the funny part is he's sort of like a surfer dude, Mallory called him, and he started his career out doing graffiti works, you know, doing things. He did a surfer series. He's done a lot of different types of things. He did what I love is a series on California state prisons.
Oh.
Which was, I believe, like over 30 prisons, and they're like these huge landscapes, essentially. But when he digs into a subject, he likes to sort of really explore it from a lot of different vantage points. This piece, again, is part of his series that he did on Stonewall, but he also did some scenes related to gang violence, particularly in LA. He likes to talk about social issues, political issues, and right now we've been in a time where a lot of different things are happening in our society. Why do you think he wanted to be a history painter, somebody who captured critical moments in history?
Well, I think, as you just described it just a little bit ago, the comparison between the painting by the French artist versus this kind of new version, it tells us, right, that in some ways a lot of things are different, and in a lot of ways they've remained the same, and how crucial it is for us to still fight for our rights and fight for equality for everyone.
Yes, these paintings do help us do that. I appreciate you helping me look at this piece. Thank you so much.
I had so much fun today.
I did too. I guess we don't have any thoughts from the chat.
We are quiet in the chat.
Mallory, do you have any questions?
You know, I was struck when you were talking about the elements in this piece, and I noticed the complementary colors for the first time, so I'm kind of rewinding us back a good 15 minutes, but like when you were talking about the triangle and I see the two figures on the ground, I see the purple and yellow, on the other side the green and red.
Oh, okay.
And it just like further solidified for me how just formally strong this painting is, in addition to its size, and really there's a lot going on, and for as much as going on, it's also very clear and straightforward. So that was the new, fresh observation I had on it today, and I also just really appreciated spending time with it after not being here for so long and learning with the two of you.
I love that you mentioned that too, because I think it's really important for our viewers to know that you can go back and look at a piece, rediscover it, you know, go away, be in a different frame of mind, see something else that means something else. And so visiting the museum is just so important, and I want to encourage everybody to come to the Crocker Art Museum, find a piece that you love, take a look at this piece, particularly in recognition of Pride Month, and we wish you all the best. So thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Yes, I had such a good time. It was so much fun.
Always fun with you. Thank you, Ms. Mode. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hello. Welcome to Gallery Bytes. We're so excited to have you here today, teachers. We know that this is the end of the school year for many, and so thank you for chiming in. We look forward to talking to teachers and students alike. We do want to mention that this piece has a little bit of violence in it, and so if you're sensitive or feeling sensitive today to this, please feel free just to join us at another time. We want everyone to really have a good time exploring this piece, and so just FYI there. I am excited to be here today. My name is Stacy Shelnut-Hendrick, and I'm the Director of Education here at the Crocker. And we are joined by a few folks in the background that you will not get to see. One is Mallory Marsh. Say hi, Mallory.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to be watching the chat. Shout out to Andrea at home, who's already gotten us off to a good start by saying hi to everybody. So for those of you at home, anytime you want to ask us a question or answer a question, just pop it in the chat and I will relay it to our presenters.
Thank you, Mallory. Well, Mallory and I are here joined by a very special guest today. I'm super excited to introduce to you Miss a la mode.
Hi.
Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you here. So today is a special edition of Gallery Bytes. We are doing this special edition to commemorate Pride Month. And those of you who don't know, Pride Month was kicked off almost, more than 50 years ago. It commemorates the gay liberation movement start in conjunction with the Stonewall uprising. And so we're gonna be talking about a piece today that connects to that very moment, and we're gonna be investigating it as a team, right?
Yes.
So before I get started, let me just say that you are like blowing up big time right now. You were the 2019 Sacramento News and Review Performer of the Year, Drag Performer of the Year. You've been performing drag for about 7 years now,
Yeah.
like in your current state.
Yes.
But you're also an educator. You work at 916 Inc. And 2021, you were named Miss Sacramento Drag Queen of the Year, right?
Yes, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So now how was a la mode started?
Yeah, so I went to school for dance, and when I graduated, I didn't really feel connected to the concert dance scene. So I found a real home in nightlife. I joined a drag and burlesque troupe. I was performing boylesque, which is like male burlesque with a feminine kind of face of makeup. And that just kind of morphed when I moved to Sacramento into this final form. If you play Pokemon, it's like the final evolution. And that's how a la mode was born.
Well, we're excited to have you here, Miss Mode. So we're going to be looking at this work of art really closely, and for the teachers out there, we want to encourage you to use works of art with your students in teaching history, math, everything. And this piece has a lot of historical connotations, but it also is an amazing work of art. So let's get started. Let's take a good look at it, okay?
Let's do it.
All right, we're going to be your eyes for this. And we're all going to take a really close look at it right now. I think we have some helpers, and they'll zoom in every now and then to different things. But one of the things we want to do when we look at a work of art is really have our eyes just sort of scan it. You're taking like a full view. You're going up and you're going down, all around. Sort of let your eyes wander and then almost question why they wandered where they wandered. To make this easy for our viewers, what we're going to do is talk about this piece going clockwise. And so, given that, let's start in what we'll call the upper right quadrant.
Yeah.
You set?
Yes, let's
All
do
right,
it.
let's do it. So what do you see? Let me say this. What do you see that we haven't talked about already today? Because we talked about some different things. And I just noticed something that I hadn't noticed before.
Oh man, see now it feels like a pop quiz.
I know. I'm putting the pressure on.
I know, right? I see the uniformity of the police officers. I see this flag that says legalized gay bars. This is the Stonewall Inn's sign. And there's actually a quote on the window of the Stonewall Inn.
I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah, right?
That's interesting. So can we read the quote for our viewers? It's hard.
We homosexuals plead with our people to please help maintain peaceful and quiet conduct of the village. Mattachine, and that's in reference to the Mattachine Society, which was kind of an underground group of mostly gay male activists.
Oh, thank you. I had no idea. Wonderful. So we have a direct message in this right quadrant, but we also have some imagery of the police officers sort of like storming, moving down toward the painting.
Yeah.
What else do we have going on there?
In this first quadrant right here, I just noticed really kind of smaller here, this gentleman basically being trampled by this horse with this police officer sort of in the corner.
Yeah, that's something actually I didn't notice before. One of the things I find interesting too is like how these meters are being torn and all over. So there's a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion, a lot of sort of action happening up there. Let's go down and sort of check out what's happening in this lower right-hand side.
So I can see this gentleman right here sort of cowering in fear in the bright green pants. And then this gentleman right here is also kind of cowering, sort of guarding himself, shielding himself in these bright red pants. And I like the contrast, the complementary colors of the pants, the red and the green right here. And then I also love this woman's bright blue eyeshadow.
Does everybody else notice that? Sort of like the fear on the faces and sort of like open mouths. There's very much also a sense of action, but it gets a little bit more personalized, right? As we go. Here, you just sort of have generic faces, face, 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 face. But here, you have much more personality and you have more individualization of the emotion on the face. Nice. Now we're gonna come this way. I don't know why, but when I move from this side to this side, I start getting a little anxious in this painting.
Yes.
Do you feel that way
There's
too?
much more of a shift.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Why do you think we feel that way?
I think when you're more, I want to say the word is prone, but when you have your palms open and when you're kind of falling back.
This figure.
This figure right here, exactly. It's very hard to kind of fight back in that position. So she's sort of in mid-fall with this police officer kind of poised to attack with a baton. There's a lot more sort of kind of urgent action, it feels like, in this section. We have this gentleman right here who's touching the horse, almost comforting it, but then with a fist on the other side. So there's more kind of, I would say, shades of defense. We have this person clearly who's maybe passed out on the ground because they've been attacked. But yeah, there's a lot of anxious energy.
Yeah, and when you started to talk about it, one thing I don't think I noticed before was that there's a contrast here, right? So you have both the vulnerability of this figure here, but then you also have sort of the anger, and we talked about the fists. So there's a contrast, both attack and sort of offense and defense happening here, which does create a sense of like duality that feels a little bit, off-centered. I think one of the things too that interests me about this side is that I guess maybe because of the animals intermixed with the individuals, I guess my eye just sort of doesn't know exactly where to go. Like it feels a little bit more jumbled, I guess, here than it does on the other side. We didn't really talk a lot about some of the composition elements. And so I want to sort of ask you about that, because a lot of times when we're talking about art, we talk about the elements of design, we talk about the elements of composition, the elements of art. And so let's just start with the basics, the elements of art, which are line, color, shape, space. In this piece, I feel like you mentioned some of the bright colors with the bright blue eyeshadow. Where do those colors sort of create a sense of mood for you? Like in this whole painting, we see a lot of blues.
Yeah.
but we also see some pops of color. Let's talk about the color a little bit.
I really like the pops of color as a juxtaposition on that kind of somber blue wash that we're sort of, it's almost like a wash that they do in film, right? I'm thinking of like even The Matrix where there's like that green wash, right? It's all kind of this blue lens with these pops of color coming out. And to me, it speaks to kind of the vibrant nature of the LGBTQIA community, kind of the joy that's kind of always present despite all the pain that's also there alongside it.
You know, I was thinking about the prints. It's interesting. We're in 2021, right? But this piece feels dated, right? And I'm wondering, why does the piece feel dated? And then I look at the clothing. The clothing sort of tells us about the time in which it's depicting, don't you think?
Yes, we're getting a lot of bell bottoms, chunky belts, a lot of bright patterns, a lot of stripes as well, some polka dots, which of course I'm biased, I love the polka dot. But the stripes almost form these lines, and we can actually see that throughout the piece as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it's helpful to us to understand that the piece comes from a specific era, but then the artist also does things to make us feel like they're speaking to us now, that sense of emotion, because we can connect with being afraid, we can connect with being anger. So there's definitely some things that we are connecting with. Is there an emphasis, do you think, in this composition, like a place where your eyes are drawn?
Yeah, there's this triangle that you've mentioned that we talked about a little bit with the kids earlier. But it sort of starts the point here as this police officer. Then you can kind of trace it down to the horse. There's the woman with the polka dot shirt right here, and then the gentleman in the green pants.
Yes. There's a triangle composition there, and it seems to, all fall from this main figure here. I think one of the interesting things is there's also in composition conversations about balance. And the thing that feels really unbalanced, or as you talked about, asymmetrical in this piece, is that there's a lot of fear on this side, but anger on this side, you know? Just thinking sort of more emotion, but also perspective-wise, you know, you have the sort of smaller, reduced figures over here, but then the larger-than-life figures here. And the size of this painting is enormous.
Yeah.
Yeah, you feel really overwhelmed by the moment just by the mere size. I sort of wonder, as viewers, what they would think if this was done in a smaller piece. This artist, Stonewall Burke, is actually doing a piece now, but he plays a lot with scale sometimes. And so it's interesting to think about how large he's made this piece to sort of, I think, go along with how important he thinks this moment is. Anything else do you see that I wonder if the viewers see? So I wonder if we focus back on this sort of main figure here.
I'm thinking, I mean, again, I see those lines in the baton specifically alongside the lines that we saw with the stripes on their clothing.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting how I kind of lose count of how many police officers there are, and it feels very imbalanced in that way too, in terms of the people who are fighting back and defending themselves, and the people who are attacking.
Yeah. I agree. There's so much to see. Let's take a seat and let's talk a little bit about it. So this piece is done by Stonewall Burke for our people in the audience, and his art is really interesting. So he is a little older than me. Won't tell you how old he is. He's a little older than me. So he grew up in the 70s and 80s. He started out doing a lot of like surfer graffiti related work. He did a whole series on surfers. He's also done a series on prisons. But this comes from his series that he really focused on riots and those important historical moments in contemporary time. So not like the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, but these things that happened in the last, few decades of the world that he feels are really important and critical. So this piece, Stonewall, let's talk about it. What is Stonewall? It's just, I mean, like, for some people, they must be like, so what is Stonewall? He's done a whole big painting, and he's actually done, this is one of a series of paintings. Why focus on this particular moment? And what is this moment?
Yeah, well, Stonewall Inn is a legendary, it's actually a National Historic Landmark. It's a bar in Manhattan in the Village, and it was one of many places where LGBTQIA plus individuals would congregate back before that was legal. It was illegal for 2 men or 2 women to dance with each other, and there had been many spaces, underground spaces specifically, where people of our community could meet up and dance and party and be safe, but you had to be careful. And there had been enough raids at this point that when this raid at Stonewall happened in June 1969, people had finally had it and they fought back.
And I think it's important because a lot of times when we think about civil rights movement, we think about African American civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, the March on Washington, but there were marches and riots actually that happened in relationship to this moment. So immediately they were very upset, and the gay and lesbian community just sort of fought back. For about 5 days there were riots happening, right?
Yeah.
And then later now, you know, and I think it's interesting because we just had George Floyd and a lot of the riots that happened there, but we see it also as a critical turning point, right? Sort of like the mess that had to happen in order for something really good to happen. And I think also one of the things for teachers to maybe remember is that we're talking over 50 years ago, and so it's important to sort of think about the type of prejudices that were happening to the LGBTQ community at the time.
Yeah.
Not to be able to be yourself must have been, I mean, to have to go to underground bars and all the time, I feel like had to be a situation that had to become intolerable after a while. And so this moment and these moments, just like with George Floyd, are inevitable to some degree. How can teachers sort of teach kids, you know, like how it felt to be not allowed to be yourself or persecuted? Do you have thoughts?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I think it's challenging because it's very much based on experience. I feel like having the tools, having the resources, and reaching out to your community and connecting with your community is crucial. And I also think that it really helps to understand how to boil down your viewpoint and to defend yourself with words and with peaceful actions. Peaceful protest, though it can be really challenging, can be an incredible way to get your point across. Some of the best activists were artists and writers and thinkers who took their talent and turned it into action.
And I think this is a perfect example of that, right? So we have Sandor Burke taking a moment in time to really help people understand what was happening at that time. One of the things I want to mention is that he sort of considered himself sort of a historical painter of this time, but he did a lot of these paintings inspired by other works of art. And so I know Houghton will share one of the pieces he did by Charles Philippe Lavier. I have liners, so I can't talk some days. But Charles Philippe Laviere. And this piece is really inspired by a particular work of art done in 1841 that captures a sort of war moment. And so he's likening this moment to a French war. So what do you, I mean, like, a war? Is it really a war going on?
I think so, and it also is a real clever comment on how in some ways things have changed, and in some ways things are still the same way that they you know, always have been.
I think that the analogy is interesting to me because often wars are fought for freedom. You know, at least, you know, the American Revolution was fought for freedom. This, you know, was a fight for freedom and a fight for rights. And I think he's done a really good job to sort of talk about it. I mean, in this painting, we have the police, but they just represent sort of the establishment.
Exactly.
It's not necessarily them fighting the police, it's fighting the government and injustice. So it's interesting. He's used a lot of text in this piece to sort of say sort of specific messages, but I think one of the things that also comes clear to me is that, you know, we have to understand who are the vulnerable in society and, you know, speak out for them and sort of recognize where those sort of pain points are. Else we don't get better as a society as a whole.
I love that piece because I do feel like when I see that when I see this piece. I think for teachers too, it's really important to talk about, this piece was done in 1998 to commemorate the 30th anniversary of Stonewall, and that sort of notion of current history, right?
Yeah.
That's a hard thing for kids to get because they think, you know, they look at me, look at you, and they think we're ancient, right? But we're not. But things are changing all the time, and you and I and the young people taught by the teachers looking today, they have an opportunity to change history at any moment, right?
Yeah, there's so much more information and access to information for students than there ever has been, and also an opportunity to educate themselves and also to educate those students on those issues. And I think it's so crucial, especially at a young age, to know how to advocate for yourself and to defend yourself in all kinds of situations, personal, professional, relationships, and also to advocate for yourself and for the rights of others in your community.
And I think we mentioned for the kids, but I don't think we mentioned for the teachers, the two women who were really integral to this whole movement. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, so you've heard these names before, and if you haven't, then Marsha P. Johnson, a trans a black woman, and Sylvia Rivera, a trans Latinx woman. These were two people who were really at the forefront of the LGBTQIA rights movement during this time. And what we don't often hear about is kind of how their lives ended. So Marsha P. Johnson was murdered, and Sylvia Rivera, toward the end of her life, became homeless. And something I think that we don't necessarily talk enough about is respecting our elders and the people who defended us and fought for us so that we could be more free.
And I think, you know, as we become more familiar, you know, and have names that we should recall, say their names, those are two names that we should definitely remember because they led an amazing fight that hopefully, you know, will continue on because there's still some prejudices happening today, and we definitely want to make sure that we stay on the right side of history, as Sandra Burke has. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about next?
I don't know. I'm thinking of I forgot the name of the piece, but there's this incredible sculpture here in the museum by Tip Tipton.
Oh, yes.
It's a lot less
It's called
charged.
Wallflower.
Yes.
I would love to do that piece with you.
Oh, the first time I came to the Crocker, I saw Wallflower and my life changed forever.
All right, so you'll have to catch us there.
Yes.
But I enjoyed this. Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Yes, I had the best time.
Great. And everybody at home, teachers, good luck teaching. We actually, I think, have some information more about this piece. And if you'd like us to share it, please let us know.